And I'm supposed to tell a delightful story. So I'm going to tell a story about Jared, in which, so Jared and I both did our PhD with Bill Tracy at the University of Wisconsin. And I, one of my favorite memories of Jared is that when my son was very young and Jared and I went on a run together, and Jared was so kind, he offered to push the stroller. And I got to just run next to him, which felt like a real gift because I was mostly running with a stroller at that time. So thank you, Jared. And Jared is Organic Seed Alliance's Director of Programs. He has an MS and PhD in plant breeding and plant genetics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he studied efficient methods of developing new organic sweet corn varieties. Jared has worked in the organic seed industry for over 15 years, managing seed production at 2 farms and conducting research and education projects with OSA. He currently manages OSA's regional development in California, conducts participatory breeding projects and variety trials, and teaches farmers about seed production and plant breeding at workshops, conferences, and field days. And he lives in the coastal town of Arcata, California, with his wife, and son. Nico, and I'm not saying your last name, Nico, because I think I'm going to screw it up. Do you
No,
want to
it's
say it?
in French we would say Enjalbert, but here people say more like an angel and a bear. So
Hmm?
however you want to.
Enjalbert. uh, brings a broad vision and passion for what is possible in the seed industry, founded on his years of private sector plant breeding in multinational seed companies in Europe and the United States. His expertise in data architecture, crop modeling, fundamental breeding techniques, and participatory breeding strategies, coupled with management and plant breeding program development, find full expression in his continuing work and development of SeedLinked. And I will turn it over to you two. Thanks for being here.
Great.
All right, thanks Tessa. Thanks you all. Yeah, so we're going to share a little bit about this Osprey project. I'm going to start with the kind of overview, the reason for why we've been doing this, and a little bit of the different pieces of it, and then hand it over to Nico to talk about some of the results we've been seeing from this first kind of year and a half, 2 years of this 4-year project. Let me share my screen. Everyone seeing that all right? Okay, great. So, Osprey, it really is about trying to answer some questions on seed yield and economics. The Osprey is an acronym that is not just a bird, but it stands for Organic Seed Production Research on Economics and Yield. And the background here is, so as Abba said, every 5 years now for the past 15 years, and now this is our 4th iteration of this. We've been doing this state of organic seed where we survey farmers, seed growers, seed companies, plant breeders, and other researchers, kind of look at the organic seed system as a whole. And in the last iteration of the organic state of organic seed, we did a number of surveys and interviews specifically of organic seed producers and seed companies to try to understand a little bit more in more granularity around what some of the challenges were, some of the things that growers and companies had questions around that were limiting their ability to really succeed and lean in and be able to build sustainable seed systems. And so this chart here kind of reflects the top challenges that we heard from these surveys in terms of production challenges. And you can see right at the top there, a couple of them, number one was just achieving adequate seed yields. So how do we grow enough seed? But then number three, there was just estimating yields. There was just a lot of uncertainty and around just understanding how much seed to expect from a given area, from a given number of plants, and how does that influence, how much to grow, how much to charge, what's a fair price, all of these things. And so coming from this and from other sources, we wanted to try and address and do some preliminary research to figure some of this out and support growers and companies better. This is kind of a quote that came from some of those interviews. Just, I do just feel, this is from one of the growers, I do just feel like just having more data on yield would be useful just to figure out how much we need to grow. It's not so much like we're experienced the super low yields, which we sometimes have, but it's more just like if there was data out there that said you need this many feet of this variety or similar varieties in order to get X amount of seed yield. And that's kind of a little bit of, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do with Osprey. So, big picture here, the top 3 objectives at a high level from Osprey are organic seed yield research, organic seed economic research, and then seed production, education, outreach, and information exchange. It's a big partnership. So beyond Organic Seed Alliance, we work with many other university and nonprofit partners. Nico here with SeedLinked, but also eOrganic with an Oregon State University, Cornell, University of Vermont, Highland Economics, Colorado State, Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, and Seed Savers Exchange. And it's been really valuable to have all these partners both bringing different skill sets, but also representing different seed production regions in the country. This is a really high level structure here, but you can see there's a lot of different pieces of this project focused on different aspects of organic seed yield research. And I'll sort of touch on some of these in a minute here, from these seed yield trials, different management trials, looking at different strategies for how to achieve good seed yields, collecting information both from replicated like on station trials as well as participatory ones with farmers, and also collecting and trying to gather up what historical yield information is out there. Tying that all in with some seed economics research to understand the costs of production and what does that mean for growers' choices, and then having that come out and be useful and applicable to growers through things like our in-person events, webinars, videos, and so on. Let me just kind of walk through that in a little more detail. So the first aspect of these seed yield trials is we're doing these replicated multi-location seed yield trials. So all of many of our partnering universities and other institutions, we're all in OSA across these 7 sites: Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, North Carolina, Vermont, and New York. We're growing the same set of standard varieties of crops in a replicated fashion over multiple years to get a sense of, for these kind of 4 core crops that were identified as priorities by growers, to sort of model this approach of tomatoes, lettuce, squash, and broccoli, and basically trying to get a bit of a sense of like how do different genetics and how does environment affect seed yield. Kind of a rough little picture of diagram of what this might look like for the with the lettuce or with the tomatoes. So this picture up in the front, you can kind of see we're growing these 3 varieties of lettuce: red salad bowl, green towers, and black seeded Simpson. And at each of those sites across the country, we're growing those in 4 replications, meaning each of those 3 varieties is grown 4 different times in these different plots. And then we can get a sense of, to be able to sort of control a bit for the fluctuations that we might see in the field. And see, this is some of the tomato trials that were grown down with Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, following a very similar layout. 3 varieties, these are the same standard varieties, grown at the 7 sites, grown for the 3 years that we're doing these trials, and replicated. In addition, and Nico's going to be touching on this much more in depth, we've been working with many growers, commercial organic seed growers all around the country and beyond, to collect their seed yield information through some standard processes and data capture strategies with SeedLinked. So many of these growers are both growing actually those same kind of core varieties that we're growing in the replicated trials, as well as collecting and recording yield information on a lot of the other varieties that they're growing already. And it's really a potentially powerful tool to be able to combine this replicated information with these standard crops and standard varieties with this much broader data set around the country, around the world, across many different crops. The third sort of large trial piece here are management trials. So sort of superimposed on those different varieties that we're looking at, we're trying out a few different management strategies to do some comparisons in terms of how that might affect seed yield, how that might affect seed quality. So for example, trying to answer questions like what's the optimal plant spacing for seed yield for some of these different crops? How do high tunnels, so this is on the East Coast with New York and Vermont, how do growing under high tunnels or caterpillar tunnels affect seed yield and seed quality in places where there's seasonal rains? And then more on the west, where rain is less the issue. In fact, it's the opposite, where the lack of rain is the issue, and drought and limited irrigation is an issue. How do you manage irrigation in a way when it might be limited? How does that affect yield depending on how little you water, depending on kind of the time of year that you're doing that? And hopefully getting, some at least preliminary, answers, or digging up more questions to help us have some data that growers can use to be able to make some decisions about how they grow their seed crops. And then, as I mentioned before, tying this into economics so that there can be, decisions that can be made based on, well, how much do these different varieties yield? How much labor and other inputs are they taking to grow? And what then is sort of a fair price point? What are some, break-even prices that would need to be negotiated with seed companies to compensate for the yields that you're getting and the labor that you're putting in, and also get a sense of decision support around what varieties maybe make sense to grow given your climate, given what you might be able to expect from the yields, and given your kind of labor and input infrastructure and how much that takes to grow those crops. And then finally, as I mentioned before, trying to take all of this and turn it into useful information that's really readily out there and available to the community in a number of different forms. So this includes decision support tools that Nico is going to talk more about, but also guides, so written guides on things like seed cleaning, seed equipment, seed disease, videos to cover some of the cleaning processes around some of these different crops, and then events, so in-person events like field days throughout all those different project sites throughout the years, seed summits to convene people together. And so ultimately, the goal here, if this is the first, just the first few years of this project, and there's a lot for us to learn and a lot for us to grow, but kind of that ultimate North Star where we're going towards is providing more tools for seed growers to be able to succeed, understand, what might makes the most sense for them to grow, what fair prices are for them to be able to successfully grow those, and what management strategies might be appropriate for them to optimize those yields. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Nico to share a little bit of our results from this first couple of years, or at least really from last year's results.
Yeah, thanks Jared for laying the ground, and I'm gonna start. I don't have like hard result in terms of like, okay, let's show you some yield and difference. I think I really want to focus on what we've learned, show some first signal that are very interesting and consider as result, and really where we are heading. The first thing is that I like what you say. We want more data and we want to see the data. I think one first thing is that we can get data. Okay, we can like, and first I'm pretty impressed. Like we got data on more than 200 variety, and that combine research station and on-farm and historical data for the first year. So it's like across 30 site, 31 crop. And here you can see the map with the different research station that where all the replicated trial were. And I want to start to just step back and kind of frame it again in a different way, and Jared, you mentioned a little bit, but as a goal, me at deliverables for this project with SeedLinked is one to run collaborative trial, but really is at the end, one of the key deliverables is to build this search engine. And so it's plugging and connecting all those data sources together to can I respond to this question? Let's say, what is the organic seed yield potential of, let's say, brandywine tomato for my region here? And can I have a low, medium, high seed yield potential, average, maybe a typical range, and a confidence of like how trust I can trust this information. And for example, in year 4, so in 3 more years, can we get to this type of information? That's like a brandywine, I mean, this bioregion, that's a challenging wet Atlantic tomato. Okay, its signal is on the low side, average range per plant, because so, like one learning I'm learning through this first year is like, how does a grower think? And many growers think so differently. So how do we display the information? And those are the killer, some learning of like, do we think per plant? Do we think per area? Do we think per linear fit? And how do we put all this information together? And um, so that's my ultimate goal. And realizing that really in 2025, I think for me, and I think the big learning is really, it's really a data engineering work we're doing on how to connect all this information. And so we are moving in year 2, and we are one of the biggest things that we learn is how to get, at least for me, more cleaner, more contextualized data. So how to anchor data in time, place, context, common language. What unit are you using? Are you, yeah, like I said, pound per acre, gram per plant, like all in this diversity I mentioned, we collected information on 31 crop. Every crop is different, but also every farmer. So how do we engineer that? And Jared speak a little bit about the different process and different trial we have that I think we have a really robust trial design from station all the way to historical. And so the biggest learning is really looking at, let's say here, I'm looking at just strictly on-farm historical data here on summer squash. And I like if I just look plainly, I have 97% of the variety is just farm to farm and only 3% is a variety signal. And it's how to dissect this 97% to more G by E, local adaptation, and increase also the signal of variety. And I think that's really the learning of 2025. And one step is including climate. And so what we are looking at, we are asking, so every data is localized and we have physiological dates. And so we can, okay, say from planting to 50% flower, we can look at all the climate signal. And then from at flowering, which is essential, whether did you have heat stress and other information, and then from filling. And so all that is set in place now, where we inject Prism or general climate data. But another super strong signal, and that has a strong signal on the result we saw in 2025. And we were even I was able to start modeling about looking at those climate and those yield and kind of generate bioregion by crop in terms of performance within the US, which is very interesting. I think by year 2, we should be able to even be much more granular on like what variety do best and what key signal impact key crop and how, and that will be essential on how everything perform. But another very interesting aspect is that, okay, pulling climate data and looking, there's drought during flowering in Colorado as some signal, but even more signal is when it's validated by the grower clicking, okay, I validated, it was a very dry year for me. And this kind of like signal, manual signal, being able to click and say, okay, and those two together, this I think is very the secret sauce of validation for contextualist data. So we are improving this process. Here's a result on lettuce, for example, in station. We have significant difference between variety. We see difference, which is for first year, and it's very interesting. Um, I don't want to kind of dive into the nitty-gritty of which one was better or worse, but I think signal is really important, and it's what was matter in 2025. I think what was very interesting on tomato and lettuce, we had those core crop that were on farm and in station, and we can see a correlation in spearmint in ranking between tomato on farm and tomato in station. And so it's mean our trial design is working. There's many things to improve, but we already see good signal, and so um, and then we also, just to show you kind of where we're heading and what's possible, is like I was also pulling all this information and trying to generate report for grower of like, okay, I'm a grower and I grow all those crop, and I'm not going to mention who is this grower, but I can pull the data from the network and I can benchmark all your data against the network to see where you fit, what is your yield compared to other. That will help you also to in terms of pricing and estimation yield. And so really, uh, in terms of result and learning, is for me, it was really realizing that building process, standardizing how we record data, how do we record the contextual data, the time, the place, the unit, which language we speak, the QC process, like entering data can have so many typo. And I think the outcome and the result of 2025 is a process, at least from what and some very exciting signal, and also showing that there's a lot of data out there, and if it's well architected, we will really have, I believe, a strong tool by 2028. So that's kind of for me our learnings to 2025, and in 2026 that's super exciting. We have more trial. We're gonna include the year effect into that process, and so that's gonna give another depth of the data. Michael is also collecting a lot of more historical data that's gonna come up within the next year and a half. And so I was really I didn't know where I was heading in terms of like, are we gonna see signal in this kind of chaos diversity of practice, way, context, and we've started to see signal in environment. We see significance, and we learn by doing mistakes on different process, and I think we are moving towards the right direction. Yeah.